Hey, all right, welcome back to Brighter Rays. We're looking at Genesis chapter 40 this week, and today we're looking at 5 through 19. We're going to look at Joseph. He's in jail. The officials are there, the cupbearer and the baker are in jail with him, and they have some dreams. So let's talk about that. Okay, well, Joseph, being the one to attend to the needs of the officials, checks on them in the morning. So one morning he walks in, and as he walks in, he notices that the baker and the cupbearer looked as if they were troubled about something. So he asks them, "Why are your faces downcast today?" So Joseph has befriended them enough at this point that he is, first of all, aware of their change in countenance. There's something going on. He knows them enough that he knows there's something wrong. And then, second, he's able to approach and ask the two officials of the Pharaoh's court this question. So he knows them well enough already that he's able to go to them and ask them, what's going on with you guys? And they're willing to tell him. So there is some kind of, relationship that they already have there. So the two men confided in Joseph that they both had dreams. And these dreams were special enough that the men knew that they meant something and that they needed to be interpreted. We're told in Scripture that long ago, at many times, in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. One of these ways that God used was dreams. But it wasn't always the prophet himself that received the dream. Sometimes it was his job to interpret another's dream. Remember Daniel and his interpretation of King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Daniel was a wise man of Babylon, and like the other wise men, his job was to interpret dreams. God had given Daniel the ability to understand visions and dreams. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar wanted his wise men to also tell him what the dream was, which they couldn't do, except Daniel, because God gave it to him. Like the Babylonians, the Egyptians believed in dreams and their ability to tell the future. The gods would speak to you through your dreams. Now we can see that this belief and practice is alive and well in Joseph's day, because the two officials are upset that they do not have access to any of the wise men in the jail. They say there is no one to interpret them. There's no one there for them to go to. They can't go to anyone in the jail and say, "Hey, interpret these dreams for us." They're in jail. So they're upset. Not because they're in jail, but because they have these dreams that are plaguing them and they don't know what they mean. They mean something, but what? That's what they need to know. The unknown has driven them to sadness, and little did they know that they actually had a dreamer in their midst. A wise man had actually been jailed with them. Though they did not belong to Pharaoh, they were not Pharaoh's wise men, they were God's wise men. It was God's wise men, Joseph. Joseph says to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." God, like Daniel, has given to Joseph the ability to interpret dreams. That's what God has done. Joseph correctly attributes this to God. It's not from him that these messages come. It's not coming from him as to what the dreams mean. He's not making up a meaning for the dreams. They have a meaning. There's a reason why they had the dreams, and his job is just to bring the message. The message comes from God. Now, in the law, we read that a dreamer that leads God's people astray through their own interpretations should be put to death. And in Jeremiah, God says that he was against those that prophesy lying dreams. So this idea of dreaming and dreams from God was the way that God used it in the past. Now, nowadays, God has spoken to us by his Son, not through dreams, but by his Son. And so we don't need to rely upon these dreams to receive messages from God anymore, which is great, because if you don't have an interpreter, and you don't have an interpreter who is actually from God, then you might get the wrong message. So you go back to both the officials, right? You got the two officials. They both agree to give Joseph a try and to tell him their dreams, which is surprising because this is a Hebrew slave and they're not Hebrews, they're Egyptians. But they decide to give him a shot. And so the cupbearer goes first. He saw a vine that had 3 branches, and it miraculously blossomed and then produced ripe grapes. The cupbearer took the grapes, squeezed their juice into the Pharaoh's cup. Then he took the cup and put it into Pharaoh's hand. Joseph, hearing the dream, promptly interprets it for him. The dream means that in 3 days he would be returned to his former position as cupbearer. His downcast head would be lifted up. He'd be restored. Well, because the cupbearer would return to the side of the Pharaoh, Joseph asked the official to remember him, to do him the kindness of mentioning him before the king. Just remember me. This would be his payment for the interpretation. Usually you would pay the wise men for their interpretation. If you were seeking an oracle or something like that, you would bring something to pay the wise men to hear from God. That's what so all Joseph asks is this: just remember me before the Pharaoh. Then Joseph describes his situation. He says he was stolen out of the land of Hebrews, and he has done nothing. And he hadn't done anything there. And then in Egypt, he was, to be thrown into this pit. Isn't it interesting that Joseph does not condemn his brothers, nor Potiphar's wife in a statement of how he got to the prison? He doesn't say, well, Potiphar's wife did this, blah, 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 blah. He doesn't say, my brothers sold me into slavery. He said, no, I was stolen out of the land of the Hebrews. Then I didn't do anything, but I got thrown in this pit anyway. He simply says he was stolen, and that he was an innocent man. A lesser man would point fingers and name names, right? But Joseph doesn't do that. He's not a lesser man. He's a great man. He's a godly man. He doesn't condemn, but only asks to be treated fairly. He's not saying, well, they were wrong for what they did. He's saying, I just want to be treated fairly here. That's all. Well, while the cupbearer is talking with Joseph, the baker hears that the interpretation of the dream was favorable. So he asks Joseph to interpret his dream. Now, the baker dreamed that he had 3 cake baskets on his head. It was the norm for Egyptian men to carry heavy loads upon their heads, while women would carry them on their shoulders. Now, in the top of the basket, he had all kinds of baked goods for the Pharaoh. As he was carrying them, birds came out of nowhere. They came and began eating all the food. It was a somewhat similar dream to the cupbearer. They both were performing their jobs in their former positions. They both were serving the Pharaoh, but the outcomes were a little bit different. Now, upon hearing the baker's dream, Joseph was ready to interpret that dream. Like the branches, the baskets represented 3 days. And like the cupbearer, the baker's head would be lifted up as well. But his head would be lifted up so that it could be lifted off. And then his body would be impaled and put on display where the birds would come and eat his body. Slightly different interpretation, right? We don't have the response of the baker. But 3 days later, they would find out if the Hebrew slave in Pharaoh's prison was a wise man or not. The proof of a prophet was the track record of accuracy of his interpretations. So we're going to see, who is Joseph? Is Joseph who he says he is? And we get to see that 3 days later. So come back next time. We'll look at verses 20 through 22 and see what happens in this story.